Hey, welcome back to the studio. Today it feels more like fall, and so it seems appropriate that I would be working on an autumnal project. I have the pumpkin patch that I finished up in a previous video. In that video I didn't have the border picked out, but I have the border picked out now. It's a really nice autumnal batik fabric. This will also play a role as the backing fabric in this production. And let's see what else I have. I believe this is Harvest Gold. Autumn Harvest is the name of this Isacord 40 weight. That is what I'm going to use as my top thread. The bottom thread I'm going to do more of a rust color to match the backing. I have Dream Cotton batting, and I'm going to use Fall Foliage as my quilting pattern from Urban Elements. I'm going to bring it in at about 8.5 inches high. I believe that is the height that it was recommended by the designer. So I'm going to go ahead and get this loaded. Now I will say with this particular pattern, I probably could have loaded this horizontally or vertically, and by that I mean I could have loaded the quilt this way. And if I had done that, I would have had probably less time in the whole project, because although the sewing time would be the same either way, what would save me time is the roll-ups, and there would be fewer roll-ups going this way than there would be going this way. Maybe only one extra one, but it would save a little bit of time. You can do this all the time depending on the quilting pattern that you choose. If your quilting pattern is directional, and the easiest explanation I can use is we have a free pattern called Happy Birthday, and it spells out Happy Birthday. So obviously you would not want that running vertically on the quilt. You want it horizontally so you could read it. So that's what I mean by directional. Some of the patterns are directional because they have novelty items on them that are recognized in a specific way. Those you would still always want to load the quilt upright. But there are times with a geometric pattern, for instance, or an overall floral or a feather, that it doesn't matter if you load it horizontally or vertically, so you could do that either way. And one way generally saves you a little bit more time because there's fewer roll-ups. So that's just an option. We do get that question quite often though. So it's something to think about, and this would be true whether you're using digital or panto or even a tearaway. Now that brings up another topic. So many of our patterns are available in so many different options. We still produce stencils for people who do hand quilting or who mark their quilts in that way with a stencil. So that could be for people who do hand quilting, a domestic sewing machine, or even some people would do it on a long arm with specific wreath blocks or something you could mark directly on the block. We have tearaway patterns that are single use. You would adhere the block to the quilt or the edge to edge with something like 505 temporary spray adhesive, sew through the tearaway, and then when you're finished you tear it off. Then we have paper pantos, both in edge-to-edge design as well as circles, setting triangles, corner triangles, and blocks. And we have a whole new assortment of blocks available on the website. Then we have the design boards, or some people know them as groovy boards, that are pieces of flat plastic with a groove in it, and there's a stylus that goes into that groove, and you would operate the machine that way. Some people think of it as training wheels, but also if you're using a geometric shape, this is one of the only ways to get a really good geometric quilted pattern without having the expense of the robotics. Because you're in that groove, you get a nearly perfect design, and I would rather do it that way than try and freeform with a panto if you didn't have the atomic computerized system. Lastly, we have paper pantos and then the digital. digital downloads. We also offer self-print on some of our paper pantos. So if you were in Canada or Australia and you didn't want to pay the exorbitant fee for shipping, you could do a self-print at home using your own printer and your own paper, and you would tape the pieces together. And there's videos on how to download and put them together on the website, because we have both vertical and horizontal. Anyway, both on Facebook and our YouTube website. And I think right now we're somewhere around 150 videos. Just around the time of COVID, we knew that the industry would be changing, and we wanted to be able to continue our educational support to our customers. We really started diving into doing the videos. It was then that we started doing videos once a week. Every Saturday morning there's a new video released. We schedule them at 9 a.m. Our time, and I don't think in 3 years we've missed a single Saturday. They're all free. They're all available on Facebook and YouTube, and if you subscribe you would get a notification when we have a new one. And it's a great resource for a wide variety of topics. We've done them on the pantograph grids, on paper, the groovy boards, everything that I mentioned previously, as well as applique. And you might be wondering why I've got these weird things on the table. And I'm cleaning out my studio, which is in a carriage house, an outbuilding, and I'm trying to go through stuff because I want to downsize. And so I just wanted to show you some of the crazy things that when I was out antiquing or rummaging that I found that I didn't think I could live without. But ever since I brought them home, I have no place to put them or use them. This is some kind of a copper, it could be from a roof. For a while wanted to put it on the ceiling, but I didn't really know how to mount it. I didn't want to drill holes in it. And surprisingly, I paid a lot of money for that. I actually saw this at an antique store and I couldn't live without it. I went back 2 or 3 times because I couldn't justify the expense of it, not knowing how I was going to use it. You see who won. It came home with me and I still never know how to use it. And then I have this glass ball that I've used for a mirror ball for a while in here. But both of them are probably going to have to find a new location, but I'm sure you've done the same thing. If you want, you could comment with a photo of something crazy that you saw when you were out rummaging that you couldn't live without, and you don't know why you couldn't live without it. Anyway, we're going to get this on the frame. This is called Pumpkin Patch. We'll get it on the long arm. I already have my backing and batting loaded, so this shouldn't take too long, and then we'll go ahead and get started. On my little post-it note, I have all my pertinent notes for this particular quilt. The name of the applique pattern, the name of the quilting pattern, my thread, my batting choice, and I also have written down the size. And when I do the size, I'm actually adding 1.5 inches, 2 inches to both the length and the width, just to accommodate the quilt shifting a little bit and the IntelliQuilter program. Because once you determine a size, you can't really add to it. You can shrink it by using the adjust button, but you can't add on to it. Now, having said that, I will tell you, if you run to the bottom and you don't have enough quilting rows for the size of the quilt, you can lie to the program by, when you realign it, you realign higher than what you actually are, so that it gives you an extra row beneath it. It's a trick I found, but you really can't do much for the width that I know of. So I'm going to start with new. I'm at the main menu. I'm going to design sew, start new, erasing the work in progress, and resetting the clock. This is going to be a pantograph, so I'll select that. I'm going to enter my rectangle manually based on the measurements I gave myself earlier, and that's 32 by 43. This is a small one, so it should go pretty quick. You see the representation on the screen of the size of the quilt. It looks right. It is a rectangle. One of the things I love about the IQ, well, there's 2 things. One, the tablet's right here on the head of the machine, so I'm right where I'm working. The other thing is everything is words that I understand, and so it's very easy to get through this without having to memorize 100 different icons. I like that. So I'm going to hit finished, and I believe I have this in my Urban Elements file. It could be in my download still from Urban Elements, so I'm just going to hit F, and pretty sure it's fall foliage. Here we are. I'm going to select that twice for the even and odd rows, and you see based on this information there's a couple things. One is I can't link these together as it is. This is one of the reasons why IntelliQuilter brings in a pattern at the even and odd rows. So I'm going to offset this, and I'm just going to offset it until this upper leaf is in the middle of the lower leaves. So right about there. Now I can hit my gap and get rid of this space in between, and I can do that just by running my finger diagonally. And now I want to get my row height. I know on the program it said it was about 8.5, 8.25 for the pattern height, not the row height, but there's only one button for each. So what it's going to be actually adjusting is the row height, but along with that is the pattern height. So I'm just going to run my finger diagonally until we get to about 8.25, and I can do the rest with the plus or minus key. So now my pattern height is 8.281. That's pretty close to 8.25, and I can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows that I'll be doing. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit finished. I'm going to accept continuous transition. The transition is when it sews off. Do I want to stop each time it sews off and cut the thread, or let it just sew a straight line down to where it's going to come back on again? That's continuous, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to hit Sew Quilt. I'm going to use Panto Sequencing Assist, which will allow me to sequence the entire quilt. I'm going to do the very first row, which is just the very tips of the leaf. It may not even actually be on the quilt. And I'm going to hit continue. I'm going to hit Panto Sequencing Assistance again. I'm going to alternate the rows left to right and then right to left, and I'm going to tie off in between. I'm going to do the whole quilt. It just shaded all of the designs, my even and odd, in 2 different colors of green. That's just so you can see where you're at. Once I sew a row, that will convert to red. It'll actually convert to red as I'm sewing it. So now I'm ready to go ahead and hit Sew Quilt. I need to turn my machine to manual, and I'm going to reduce my speed of the machine, and I'm going to reduce my top tension just a little bit. So now the machine has reminded me to be on manual, which I am, and I've got my paper out of the way. There's nothing on the machine that should cause an obstruction, and I'm going to go ahead, let's see, yes, it did my first stitch to pull up the thread. So I'm just going to hold on to those and push start. So we just heard my beep. I'm going to raise both my foot and my needle and hit start. The machine already knows where I'm at. It knows where to go for the start of row 2. So I'm just going to hit start. And you can see that I have that little bit of extra on both the left and right to accommodate any shifting in the quilt top. I used a little bit of 505 temporary spray adhesive on the batting and pressed the top down onto it, as well as basting the edges. That really gives me a really tight bond between the edges of the quilt to prevent any kind of chance that the hopping foot could get stuck underneath the top and cause knotting. And the problem with that is sometimes you end up making a hole by trying to cut the machine out from between the quilt. You can see that as the machine sews, we go from red to green. That's an indicator of that part of the design has been sewn. And also we can see that this quilt is a 31-minute project as far as sewing time. It'll be a little extra from that for rolling up. Already I can see that I really like the Autumn Harvest thread on both the border and the background. I didn't go with the real novelty print, anything with characters in it. It's just leaves, autumn leaves, so I think the pattern will look good both on the front and the back. I'm going to raise the pressing foot and the needle. I'm going to actually cut this time just for one reason, just to show you that on the tablet what we've sewn is red. We can see the next row in green. If I go take the crosshairs below the lowest point on the next row, I can see that there's room enough for that to sew out. So that was the only reason I did that, just to make sure that I don't have to roll up, and we're fine. Also, I don't have my ruler base on, which saves me a few inches, so I can go ahead and go back to the start of row 3. And hit start. It will pull the thread up, and we can go ahead and hit start. We're probably about 1/3 of the way finished. By the time this pass will complete. So I figure we'll probably only have 2 roll-ups. So I'm going to go ahead and let this one sew over, and then we will roll up the quilt and realign. And that's it. I have 1 partial row and 2 full rows complete. I'm going to go ahead and lift the foot and clip the threads, pulling up my bobbin thread. Clip both of those. I'm going to look at the screen and at the next row, and I'm going to choose the highest point on the next row and drop my needle. Now this is the row that I have not sewn yet. It's the highest point of the design. Now I'm going to roll the quilt up. I'm going to make sure my batting is smooth. Make sure the quilt is smooth. If you have a problem border, you could spray a little bit of 505 and trying to get smooth that out as much as possible so you can see what it's going to look like. If you can get it smooth with the 505 and then quilt over it. Some people also use starch and then steam it dry, and it helps to shrink some of that excess border. But now I have to hit realign, and the button's right here. And I can see where my rows are. The machine thinks I'm way at the top, but I'm really down here. So now I could go ahead and, instead of choosing the next row to sew, I'm going to actually use a point on a row that I already have sewn. So I'm going to touch a reference point on the screen, and it's going to be the very bottom of a point. It's going to be the bottom of a leaf. So I'm going to move the machine over to that point, hit continue, and now it's going back to my next start point, and it'll be ready to sew. Now I'm going to base the edges real quick. Pulling up my bobbin thread even on my basting, and I'm going to baste those edges. I'll do the other side. Now I can take it back to the start position. Because I've used the Panto sequencing, I can see exactly the rows I have and haven't done, so I can go right back to the start of row 4, and the arrow should be pointing in the direction that we want to sew. So I'm going to pull up the bottom thread again. Hit start. Oop, I have to go back to manual. And now I'm going to move you in a little bit closer this row so that you can actually see the design. This is one that I would definitely put on your wish list if you don't have it. This works really good for autumnal quilts, both Halloween and Thanksgiving. It also would work really well with something organic for a men's quilt, but also for anything with an Asian influence, because it looks similar to Japanese maple, and it's adding a lot of really beautiful texture to the quilt. Also, I have to say I don't think it's detracting from the applique in any way, which is always a concern whenever you do any kind of quilting that is going to go over top of the applique. I'm going to let you finish this out. I'm going to go ahead and push start. We're going to go to the very last row. Technically it's row 8. It's only about an inch below the bottom, so I'm just going to go ahead and let that sew as it is. If I wanted to, I could have adjusted that up to the actual bottom of the quilt, but I'm going to let you carry this out. This one is finished. I just have to take it off the frame. I know sometimes people complain about the excess fabric that we have to have on the long arm to accommodate the attaching to the frame. But it doesn't bother me. This particular sample is one that I'm making for here. I do the same thing that I would request of other people. I want at least 5 to 6 inches all the way around. Since I go so close to the top when I attach the top, it leaves a lot at the bottom. That gives me a good 9-inch wedge at the bottom, the full width of the quilt. So I can utilize that for making the sleeve for this quilt. So that part will get used for that. The extra pieces on the side, if I want, since this is just a wall hanging, I could use for straight of grain bias and just cut straight strips. I still would cut the 45 at the top and bottom to join them, but because this isn't going to get any wear and tear by pulling the quilt up in bed, I don't have to worry about the bias binding necessarily. It should certainly survive the life of the quilt as a wall hanging. I almost always put a sleeve on anything that is going to be a wall hanging, because you could use clips with it or you could use a rod. The other reason is I have a friend that helps me do that part of it. I mean, I machine do it and she hand whips it down. So that's a time saver for me, and it makes sense just to get it finished. So I'm going to take this off the frame and get it trimmed up, and then the next step for me, which will be off camera, will just be making the binding and the sleeve and probably getting a photo for Instagram. But I will show you what the finished quilt looks like at the presentation table. Well, that brings us to a conclusion. I have the piece nicely trimmed. As you can see, I used the same fabric on the backing, just as I said. Really beautiful autumnal batik fabric. This was a pretty quick project all around. I don't believe that the pumpkin patch applique took any more than 20 or 30 minutes once we got our backing ironed and cut. Just a matter of peel, place, and press on that. And then the quilting time on the quilt top was 31 minutes. So I think for a finished quilt, wall quilt, for about an hour's worth of work is pretty good. Now I will go ahead and put the binding on it, so that will take a little bit of time. Some people like to machine both parts. I machine the first part of mine and then hand it off and somebody else whips it. Although I have whipped many of quilts before, I'm just lucky right now that I have someone that's willing to do that. So this will be another great one to hang here in the studio, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm getting to the point where I've almost made as many samples myself as what I had from the design office, and I just kind of like the little bit of a play that we get by using our own background fabric and our own border fabric. Those choices help to personalize our pieces. Now with the applique, you could always use the SVG file instead of our kit, or just the paper pattern and use all of your own fabric. These are all options to you. But this is a great one for the books, and I still am curious if you guys have any stories about things that you've picked up at a rummage sale that you couldn't live without, either quilt relating or not. Just go ahead and comment, and we can all get a chuckle out of that about ourselves. And thanks for stopping by the studio and watching this project with us. Just make sure that you take care of yourself. You can't take care of others if your cup is empty, and then you can take care of each other. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time. Mm-hmm.